Krishna Saravanamuthu is the national spokesperson for the National Council of Canadian Tamils, and he joins us in studio for more insight on the people on board that ship. So, Krishna, now that the ship has landed, at some point these people will be able, if their health permits, to start telling their stories. What are their stories? What prompted them to risk their lives to flee to Canada?
Well, their stories can actually be can be found in the reports of organizations like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, the International Crisis Groups. All of these prominent human rights organizations have accused Sri Lanka of very serious human rights violations.
Can you give specific examples? What have you heard is happening to Tamils that would compel them to take such a huge risk to come to Canada?
So, for instance, during the final 4 months of the war last year, there were severe allegations of hospitals, for instance, being bombed, where Tamil citizens were seeking refuge. In addition to that, there were safe zones that were declared by the government not to be military targets that were deliberately then targeted by the government.
But the war is now over.
Now that the war is over, what we see is a continued violation of human rights for the Tamil minority. There are about 80,000 Tamil citizens who are languishing in government-held camps. Within these camps, there's a heavy military presence. There's no freedom of mobility. These individuals have no access to lawyers, and there are also reports of extrajudicial killings that are happening within these camps as well.
So would you expect that some of the people in those camps might have been able to flee Sri Lanka and possibly be on this ship? And that begs the question, how could you, if you're languishing in a camp, muster the money? How do you get $40,000 to pay someone to let you on board a ship that takes you to Canada?
Well, they must have went through hell and high water to ensure that they can escape the island of Sri Lanka. Since the end of the conflict, we continue to see a fundamental denial of civil liberties for the Tamil people within the island. In 1978, something called the Prevention of Terrorism Act was enacted, which fundamentally denied Tamil citizens, the freedom of speech, the freedom of association, the freedom of political belief. And even though the war is over now, this act continues to give broad powers to the government to arbitrarily detain, to arbitrarily interrogate, and to arbitrarily arrest Tamil citizens.
Again, why Canada? It's a long way to go. Yeah. Why not go flee the country and go somewhere else? Are Tamils not welcome elsewhere?
Well, I think Canada has a very strong reputation, and I think a noble reputation of always opening up its arms to those individuals who truly do need political asylum. And in saying this, it's important to keep in mind that our federal government has already accepted tens of thousands of Tamil citizens into this country, and they've accordingly then accepted that they are facing persecution at the hands of the Sri Lankan government.
As you know as well, though, just in the past 24 hours, Vic Taves, the Harper government is saying they are concerned that Canada's position on this is being exploited, that there are criminals who are taking advantage and terrorists are taking advantage. How concerned are you that legitimate asylum seekers could be undermined by those trying to exploit Canada's position? Is that a real concern?
Well, the Tamil community in this country, as well as its allies in the broader Canadian community, accept our federal government's legitimate right to promote national security, to protect this country's safety. But at the same time, we kindly request our government to keep in mind that these individuals are fleeing war and persecution, and they should be treated with compassion, and they must be afforded their due process in accordance with Canadian law, as well as our country's international obligations.
Is there anything that you or other leaders in the Tamil community in Canada can do to help with the processing, to make the distinction between those who are here because they legitimately seek refuge and those who are here perhaps to stoke the fires of terrorism, to stoke Tamil independence in a way that is exploiting the system?
Well, one thing to keep in mind is that last year in October, when we faced a very similar situation, there was a boat called the Ocean Lady that landed off the shores of BC. There were 76 Tamil refugees on board that ship, and at that time, very similar allegations were made that, they were in fact members of the Tamil Tigers on board the ship. And so the government actually tried to use something called Section 86 of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act to bring forward secret evidence that individuals were terrorists on board the ship. it turned out that the federal government actually had to revoke Section 86 because they had no evidence to substantiate those claims.
But as I understand it, the process is ongoing, is it not? I mean, the determination for those who arrived last October, it's not been finalized.
Well,
so
those individuals have now been considered admissible into the
Right.
country because they pose no security threat. And now they're going through the natural channels of our refugee system.
Just going back, if we're able just to show again the Sun Sea in Esquimalt, as we look at that ship, help me understand what these people have gone through on that ship. I think we're all surprised to see that it's quite a small ship, if in
Yes.
fact there are almost 500 people on board.
Yeah.
What are the conditions as you understand it?
The conditions that I'm understanding is that, there are severe health problems that are going on board this ship. Many of these individuals on this ship are under the age of 13, for instance. So, that's something that's definitely concerning for us as Canadians. In addition to that, we know that many of these individuals, are suffering from post-traumatic, psychological effects, having escaped war and persecution within the island of Sri Lanka. And so that's why it's really important that, Canadians within this country, as well as our federal government, are treating these individuals with compassion. Our country does have a strong history of doing this. I remember, reading the history books when at one time refugees from Vietnam came here, and our country did open up its arms, and our country did say, you know what, these people need our help, and I don't see why this situation is any different.
Krishna, I appreciate your time. Thanks for sharing your thoughts and observations with us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.